Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we are going to paint this long neck rainbow giraffe, and I figured I would do a tutorial for this because so many people requested this one as well as this one that we did on a live stream a couple weeks ago. And I figured I might as well paint this up because a lot of people wanted it, and also it'll have something to run while I am traveling to teach workshops in Massachusetts. So rather than having no video today because it's a normal live stream day, I figured this one would be good to play in place. So what I'm going to be using is the same colors I used for this. You can use any brand of paints you want. I'm going to be using my Turner watercolors because I still have them on my palette here, and we're not going to be doing as much mixing as we normally do because we're going to be using those bold pigments and just kind of letting them really flow nice and wildly. I had a tutorial on how I colored this white dish to be a tinted glass dish to hold my brushes. I found it really cheap at an antique mall, so that tutorial's on my channel as well. So what we're going to do is we are going to begin by taking some clear water, and we are going to start by wetting this large shadow area here, and I will put a link to, I'll try to remember to put a link to my pattern here in the video description, and if I forget, and I'll be traveling, I'll be away, so if I've forgotten to, just go to the live stream of the other rainbow giraffe and both patterns are linked up. So when you're wetting these areas here with clear water, you don't have to go right up to the edge. In fact, it's better to be a little within the lines than outside of the lines, just so when you go to put your paint, you don't end up having it floating out where you don't want it, because the paint's only going to go where the paper is wet. So then I'm going to switch to a smaller brush, and I'm going to start applying my color. And I'm going to use, I think I'll use a smaller Mimic here. And I'm going to start working from the neck, which is going to be the most shaded area, and I'm going to start purple and work backwards down the rainbow. So I'm starting with a dioxazine purple or violet, and I'm going to add that right up here under the chin. And the next color I'm going to go to is ultramarine, and since everything's wet, I can go right from my dried paint. And I kind of trace the outline of the spots and the shadow shape and just kind of let the paint flow, because then you get a really interesting mixing happening on the paper and it's nice and fresh. Now keep in mind, if your paper is really wet and your paint's really wet, you're going to have a lot of shifting. That's why I'm not really wetting the paint. I'm just going into the wet paper. And if you think it might be too light, then go right ahead and add some more pigment, because it will dry a little bit later. And this can be done with like Crayolas. I really like Prang watercolors for like the original, not the washable, but the original Prang watercolors for really inexpensive paint. It works really well. Now I'm going to go into my phthalo blue. And that's going to, it's a little bit more of a green based blue, so it'll go into green really nicely. Now in this point I will mix my green, which I have some here, which is a phthalo and Hansa Yellow Light. I've already mixed that when I did the other draft, so I'm going to go right in with that. If you want to use like a phthalo green, you can do that. It would be a little bit more vivid. I'm going to blot out that ultramarine that has kind of flooded down. There we go. And now I'm going to go in with my Hansa Yellow Light, or you could use lemon yellow or permanent yellow. Any cool to neutral yellow will work well. And then I'm going to mix my orange on my palette. I've just used like a Pyrrole Scarlet and that same yellow. You could also use a premixed, like a cadmium yellow, like a single pigment yellow, an orange, and that would be really vibrant and beautiful. So if you were, like, say, using Crayola or Prang or, you know, a student grade watercolor like that, like a kid's grade, go right into that pan, because sometimes it gets kind of dull when you mix with those colors. Now I'm going to go into the Pyrrole Red on its own and trace those edges and just kind of let them float together. I think I might have blotted up a little too much water because my paint doesn't want to flow so much right there, so I'm going to help it. And the next color I'm going to go to is my Cool Red, which is like a rose red. You can use rose red, alizarin crimson, any of your quinacridones. That has a really nice flow to it. This is probably my favorite color out of the batch, so I might do a little bit more of this color than others. And then that's going to go off into the violet color really well. I do notice a little bit more of a shift when this dries, so I want to make sure I put plenty of that color in. So you do, when you're doing this long rainbow part, you do want to work fairly quickly because you want to make sure that it stays uniformly wet so that you don't end up with like blossoms or blooms or, you know, hard edges in the gradation. And if you want to, you can just take the purple right to the end, or you can add in some ultramarine blue at the end. And if you have a bead, I would recommend just a puddle of water. I would recommend you soak that up. I usually just dry off my brush and kind of set it in there, and it can soak up the water. And then you can check and see if it got too light. If it got too light, then you can go right in a little bit more color. There. And then that's not touching anything else, so that can, except for it's kind of touching the face a little bit, so there's a lot of area we can work on while we are, while that's drying. So I'm just going to, I'll start here at the bottom and work my way up. And I will start by, I think I'm going to move to a larger brush altogether. I think I'll use this this Majestic number 8 round because I don't need it to hold a ton of water, and it's got a nice point on it, so I probably won't need to switch brushes. So I'm going to wet a few spots down here at the bottom, and these will be my purpley going into rose red colors. And depending on how fast you work, you might just want to wet a couple spots. I'm not going to wet the ones touching the mane yet because I will want to work those kind of like I did the shadow. So I'm going to start off with my violet on its own. And just make sure that my edges are nice and sharp. And then as I get up closer to where it's starting to cross over to the red, I will just add the violet on one side of the spot. And then I will clean my brush and go for some of the red. And just let them mix on the paper. I still might want a little bit of violet in this one, so I'm just going to pick it up off my palette where I have a little mixing. So it just is a little bit more gradual. And then if you feel like you want to push any of the colors together, you can do that. Next, I'm going to go right into the rose red, and sometimes I like to just kind of work it off my brush to make sure I don't have any beads of water or any chunks of paint. And I'm going to go in and paint this heart-shaped spot on its own here without pre-wetting, so it's nice, and I know it's going to be nice and bright. And then I am going to wet the next few spots and get the blending going. Alright, so I'll start off with the rose red. And I've got some big puddles in there, but nothing right on the edge, so it's going to float pretty well. And then I'm going to grab my Pyrrole Scarlet. Just let them mix together on their own for the most part. And then I'll start up here with the scarlet, and then I'll go to yellow. I'm going right from the pan with the yellow because I want it to be nice and strong. And the next couple, I think I'll just use, like from my palette, some watery yellow as the base color so it doesn't get too watered down. And then I'll add a little bit of my mixed green to it. And now I'll try to just wet all those little spots just by putting pretty much just a drop of water in each of them, because they don't need much to blend when you got such tiny areas like this. And I think I will switch to a smaller brush so I don't end up carrying too much paint. And I'll start off with that green. And then I will go to some of that turquoise blue color, the phthalo blue. And then I'm going to rinse off my brush, go to ultramarine, and I'm taking it from my palette here so I don't get too much. And some of these you're not really going to have that much space for blending, but I want to get a little bit of ultramarine in those. And then I'm going to go to the violet. I'm going to grab it off my main palette and then just kind of make sure that I don't have any big gobs by swirling it on my ceramic palette. And add that into those spots that have a little bit of the blue in them. And just make sure your edges are tidy, so I'm just kind of going around and sharpening those edges up. There. And now that can dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to work on the mane. So I'm just going to start by taking this brush and I'm going to just put a bead of water all the way down. And just like we did before, I am going to drip in my colors, and I'm going to start with the purple at the top and just work my way down. So we want purple, ultramarine, phthalo, we'll go to our mixed green from our palette. Whoops, I went a little high on that, but that's all right. Yellow, which I will mix out of my palette because I felt a little blobby. And then if you have any spots, drag it into the spot areas. Then we're going to go to our scarlet, which you might want to mix out on your palette a little bit to get a little orangey. And then full strength scarlet. Oops, watch out for beads. You don't want that to slide off your brush and wreck anything. And then if you see a little space, you can go ahead and add like a spot. Now we're going to go with our rose. And that might actually kind of connect to that spot. And I'm going to bring it down into that spot there. And then we're going to go into our violet at the end and bring that into those little leftover spots there. Now we do have a bit of a bead of water, a little extra, so I'm going to just keep drying my brush off and drinking it up with that wet brush. Otherwise I'll end up with a big bloom or cauliflower there. And I'm going to grab some more of that violet and reapply. Just trying to keep those spots a little crisp. I actually am going to turn those into one spot because I got water between them. All right, so while that mane is drying there, I'm going to show you how I did the water spot background. And I basically just kind of tapped on some water here. I find it's a little easier if I can add the spatters first and then like drip water into them, drip color into them. I end up with a little bit more control. So I'm gonna start, I really like how the rainbow went around like that. So I'm gonna start with, I will tap some of this color in, but then I will just kind of let it find the water droplets like that. So I get that very, it looks very happenstance, like it just kind of happened on my paper and I really didn't have much to do with it. But there's really a lot of, you know, we can control it quite a bit more than you might expect. I'll go into the scarlet. And you can tap some on, but keep in mind that when you tap it on, you could end up with a blob where you didn't expect it to be. And then I will go on to my yellow. It's fun to let them kind of drip together too, get a really neat effect. Bring the yellow over a little bit more. Grab some of that phthalo blue. I'll kind of tap it on its own and then let them float together a little bit. Then let's make some more dabs going down the side and let purple go to the side. When you have those nice drops in there for them to bleed into, it gives you the look of it just kind of happening a little bit more randomly. And if you do get mud, just blot it. Go back around to red after the violet. Work our way to orange. If you have a little more space, you can just splatter it because you've got room. Now up there, I can see I've got some, that's going to turn into mud if I'm not careful. So I just dry my brush off and set it in there. And I can reapply my yellow. Just add it into the wet paint and it will do its blending. And I'll do a little bit of green right on the edge of it. Maybe a little bit more of that. I love that phthalo blue. It's so pretty. Okay, and down here we're going to go into our yellow. Which we can flick in if we want to, because we've got some more space here to work with. Then we can go in with our green. And we can dab some of that in there. We can get our turquoise. And we can go with our ultramarine blue. And then finally we can end with purple, where it would be, a little water to that, where it would be kind of meeting up with the purple part of the giraffe anyway. And there, so we have that nice pretty border. You could go darker with your colors, but I think that's pretty good. And now we are going to move on to the face. For the face, I'm going to begin kind of up in the corner, work my way over. Now we've just done this juicy border, so if you want to let that dry before you do the face, that's totally fine. I'm just going to go right in with this juicy red paint. This is the rose red, and I'm going to start up here in the shadow area. I have the shadows marked on the pattern so that you kind of know where to go. It's definitely more of an abstract look. Since the paint is about the consistency of like skim milk, I don't really have to wet the paper first, and that just helps me have a little more control. I want to go a little bit darker with my colors there. And you can kind of flick out some little hairs here and there if you want with the tip of your brush. It just gives it a little character. Now I'm going to bring this in over here on this shadow area, and I am going to start working towards purple. So I've got that mixed out on my palette there, where I can control it. It's easier to go onto dry paper with this technique. where you have a small space. If you were doing this like huge, you'd want to wet the paper first, but since we're working, this is 6x9. It's one of my, actually this is the Wind Power, Strathmore Wind Power paper, but my other one was done on Aqua Bee. So, you know, they're just small, pretty small papers. Blend them in together a little bit. Then I'm going to add more water to the violet, the purple color, which is actually a mix of the purple and that red. And I'm going to put this shadow in here. So you add water to make it a little bit lighter. And just going to throw in some shadows. I did use some of the watered down rose color on my original one, so I think I'll do that again. I like the way that looks. It just gives you a softer look, but you're still kind of staying in that spectrum. I am going to go with the violet purely up here. Now I do want to mention, excuse me, that I am standing quite a ways back from my paper, and when I typically paint this small, I might actually have my face a little closer so I can see details a little bit better. So if I get a little out of the lines, just excuse me. I'm going to go into ultramarine blue and add that here. And if you do get out of the lines and you want to just kind of flick out a few little hairs, you can. Just give them a little fuzz. And I think I'll grab some of that blue and go in the nostril here, and maybe even add a little bit into the shadow. And then this shadow under the nose. So you can always go in and darken it later if you want to. I would probably try to get it about where you want it on the first go, because I think it looks nice and effortless, and it's kind of fun if you have a nice effortless, if you have this done kind of in a nice effortless manner, I think. And I'm going to grab a little phthalo to blend into here because I like the way it looks. And for the eyes, I am going to go in with a violet fairly strong because their eyes are dark. And it's in the face, so it'd be fine for it to be the violet color. And that is all there is to it, really. You can go a little bit darker in some of these areas. It's probably a little easier to do it while the paint's still wet, and you can kind of float the colors in together. But have fun with it. It's a really fun project, and here's how it's going to look when it's dry. And I had a really fun time designing this, and I hope you have a fun time painting it. It's a great project to do with your kids or grandkids as a kind of fun first project. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this tutorial, please give me a thumbs up. And until next time, happy crafting.